الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعلى حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أما بعد, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in his holy book Al-Quran al-Kareem in Surah Al-Fajr, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O soul that is satisfied, that is contented, come into my paradise. Come into my paradise satisfied and all satisfying. وَادْخُلِي فِي عِبَادِي, and enter my ibad, my worshippers. وَادْخُلِي جَنَّتِي, enter my paradise. But what is this soul that is contented and satisfied? Who is this soul that is being referred to in these ayat of the Quran and in the narrations? We have traditions that lead to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So in tonight's topic, inshallah, we'll be discussing how can we introduce this man? How can we introduce this Imam, this historic figure to the world? And is he only for Muslims or is he only for Shias? Because after all, Islam is a religion for all people. It's for all the world. So what is the significance of this man and how can we introduce him to the world? Before we start, a jurisprudential issue with regards to the day of Ashura, and a question that common arises as to should we fast on this day or not? And the answer is that it is makruh, or it is not recommended to fast during the day of Ashura, the 10th day of Muharram, which is the day in which Imam Hussein alayhi salam was massacred. And that is according to the fatwas of Sayyid Sistani hafidhahullah and Imam Khamenei hafidhahullah. In fact, it's even recommended that if you own a business or you go to work, that it is better to take the day off to mourn the event of Karbala. Okay. So who is Imam Hussein alayhi salam? How do you introduce him? There are different ways you can introduce him. This man, this great figure, this historic figure. You can introduce him as, for example, the grandson of the most influential person in history, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Peace and blessings be upon our Prophet. Michael Hart, who is an astrophysicist, he researches or has researched alien life, and a white supremacist, wrote a book in 1978. It's called The 100, and it's about the most influential people in history. The number one figure that he had in that book was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, there was a lot of pressure from other people. It didn't suit the story that perhaps the powers that be had. And so they were putting pressure on him to change the number one, to revise, to reconsider. And in 1992, he revised. He added a few, he took a few out, and then he revised this book and reissued it. But again, the number one most influential person in history was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you can introduce Imam Hussein as the grandson of the Prophet. But how many people do we go around looking for the lineage and family history of, very influential people or greats that be in the world? Not many. Not interesting. You might introduce him like you would introduce, for example, Buddha, or for example, James the Just, or for example, Elder John and his wife Ellen. But they don't make a difference to people unless you're, for example, a Buddhist or, for example, a Jewish Christian or a Seventh-day Adventist. It doesn't really ring a bell. So if you introduce him as the Imam of the Shia world, okay, that's great. That's nice to know. That's not something that's really going to drive it home for people. You might want to introduce him through modern greats. So for example, Gandhi. Gandhi said during the revolution in India, he said the following about Imam Hassan and Hussein. In fact, he had quite a few things to say about them. He said Imam Hassan and Hussein refused to acknowledge the authority of Yazid. Yazid was the ruler of the time of Imam Hussein. Yazid was the son of Muawiyah, who was another ruler. So when Muawiyah died, Yazid took over the leadership of the Islamic world. Of course, it was an usurped leadership. They took it by force. Muawiyah, the father, was a little bit smarter. Yazid wasn't so good intellectually, so he was doing wrong things quite publicly, and it was quite apparent that he was oppressing people. So Imam Hassan and Hussein refused to acknowledge the authority of Yazid, for it would have been wrong to do so. And for this reason, that is, in order to preserve their honor, they became martyrs. These are the words of Gandhi. And then he continues that if India, remember this is India that was being ruled by British rule. If India wants to be a successful country, it must follow in the footsteps of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Now, we're getting a little bit closer to the mark. There was an oppressed society, a society that was colonized, and they began to liberate themselves by walking through the footsteps of Imam Hussein. Let's come a little bit closer. Imam Khamenei, may his life be lengthened, he says that Imam Hussein alayhi salam is a role model not only for the Muslim world, not only for Muslims, but also for non-Muslims who value freedom, justice, and dignity. So here we might have people who don't even believe in Imam Ali, may peace and blessings be upon him, or the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or they may not even believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in God, but they still respect Imam Hussein for what he stood up for. You see, it's what you stand up for that makes a man, that makes a person, that makes a great. Now I said man, and I apologize if that offends anyone, but let me just say that behind every great man is a greater woman, and that will level things out, inshallah. Now let's compare this. Let's compare this to what is happening today and how we can introduce this great personality in history to the rest of the world. We can introduce him through other people like, for example, Kamal Korsel, who fought in the Islamic Revolution. He was a French martyr. I believe he's the only European to be martyred in the Islamic Revolution's fight against oppression. Or Eduardo Agnelli. Eduardo Agnelli was the son of a giant in Italy. He was known as the lawyer. This is the father, Gianni Agnelli. He was known as the lawyer. He controlled about 4 or 5% of the entire Italian economy. He owned a manufacturing company of cars, Jeep, Chrysler, Fiat, Alfa Romeo, Dodge, Jeep, all those cars. He owned all these, and he was the only heir to this company. But he chose to leave all of this when he met Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayhi. And who did Imam Khomeini follow in the footsteps of? He followed in the footsteps of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. See how we're getting closer to the mark. We can introduce this man as a man who was massacred by an oppressor. His family was massacred. His children were taken hostage. They were made to walk for thousands of kilometers from Karbala to Sham. His sister, his women, everybody were oppressed on that day of Ashura. In fact, we can walk through the streets of New York and Washington and Melbourne and Denmark and Sydney and New Zealand and other countries in the West. And we can wear black and we can wave the black flags with Arabic white writing on them and say La ilaha illallah wa hayhat minna billah, and we can say all these things in Arabic. But what are the people going to say when they see these women walking behind men all wearing black, chanting Arabic slogans, carrying black flags with white writing? Now this isn't in the speech, but it's very important to say that when we want to spread the message of Imam Hussein, we need to present it properly to the people. We need to present it in a manner that the people will be able to understand and comprehend. Why is the book Nahj al-Balagha called Nahj al-Balagha, the peak of eloquence? The words of Imam Ali alayhi salam, when they were collected and they were put into this book called the peak of eloquence, because he spoke in a manner, one, that people understood, two, they've never heard before. It was beautiful, it was majestical, it was miraculous. We can use these words of Imam Ali and we can use these words of Imam Hussein alayhi salam during these times. I'm not saying don't walk through the cities of the world in these processions, but present the message of Imam Hussein in a manner that is eloquent, in a manner that people can understand. Chanting Arabic or Urdu or Farsi is not going to help. People are going to look at you as like, is this ISIS? Really, they will, because that's unfortunately what the media is doing. They're making us believe, and this was not a mistake, by the way. This is not something that has happened by chance. The black and the white writing and the procession and everything, and then people mistake this procession for something like ISIS. This is not a mistake. This is all planned out. But we're not going to change our ideology. We're not going to change our message. We're not going to change the words that we say about Imam Hussein, the revolution that he led, the revolution that has had an impact for all these years, for 1400 years and going unto eternity. It will have an effect. We just need to do it in a manner that is eloquent, so that the bystander that looks at you will understand who Imam Hussein alayhi salam is. And look up these characters. Look up Kamal Kersel. Look up at Agnelli and who he is and who his father is. Look at what they left behind for the greats, for people like Imam Khomeini rahmatullah alayhi, and why. This is the message that we need to give to the people. But I'll give you something a little bit more. I want you to have a look at what they say in the West. My daughter was looking at American proverbs, 100 American proverbs. A book, it's a small book, it's got 100 American proverbs, and one of the proverbs was this. It says, better a live coward than a dead hero. Better a live coward than a dead hero. This is what they teach our children. This is the proverb that they have in the West. Look at the words of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. What does he say with regards to death? He says, death with dignity is better than life with humility. Look at the difference. One is saying, I'd rather be alive and a coward than a dead hero. And the other is saying, death with dignity is better than life with humility. I don't want to live a life of humility. I don't want to live a life of cowardness. I'd rather die with dignity. That's the difference. And that's what makes a great. So who is Imam Hussein? Who is he when we introduce him to the world? Imam Hussein alayhi salam is a man who stood up for justice. And there's a lot of injustice at the moment. There are a lot of countries at the moment that cry democracy, that yell freedom, that yell out human rights. And they are the worst when it comes to human rights history. They are the worst. Even if you have a look at their countries and how they were established, have a look at what they did to establish that country, let alone what they're doing now, and who is rising up against them now. We should be looking at Imam Hussein alayhi salam and take his footsteps to rise and stand up against the oppression. Justice, freedom, dignity, bravery, standing up against the oppressor and standing up for the oppressed. He is the teacher of our greats. See some of the greats that I mentioned? Gandhi is considered a great, right? Imam Khomeini, Imam Khamenei, they are considered greats. And then when you look at other individuals who are not even known in the world, like Kamal Kurcel or Agnelli, the son of the Fiat head, and you see the way they moved away from this materialistic world. Why did they move away from this materialistic world? I mean, Agnelli could have had the world. He had the world. He owned football clubs and he had everything he wanted, but he left it all. Why? Because of what Imam Hussein stands for, alayhi salam. It's what he stands for. That's what we need to introduce. The principles of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, what he stood for to the world, so that we can attract the attention of the world. And there are plenty of people who are just looking for role models in order to stand up against the oppressor and rise, and revolutionize their societies. Imam Hussein alayhi salam is the example. He is the teacher of greats, the fighter of freedoms, the one who protects the women, the one who protects the children, the promoter of good and the prohibitor of evil, and the master of martyrs. He is Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So just to quickly sum it up, there are different ways we can introduce Imam Hussein alayhi salam. There's a historical, he's the son of so-and-so and he's the grandson of so-and-so. Or he was massacred and his children were killed and massacred, and they were taken in chains and made to walk. And so what? There's a lot of these stories around these days even. We can have a look at the greats though. And then we can have a look at what he stood up for, and now people will pay attention. Because people right now are oppressed. People right now are feeling that their freedoms are being taken away. And it's not just an oppression that is obvious, brothers and sisters. Let me tell you something. There are different kinds of oppression. There's political oppression, there's physical oppression, there's even medical oppression. And during the current times of the coronavirus, let us be sure to stand up against any form of medical oppression that the elites might decide is good for us. Study, understand what is going on before you agree to do anything that they say is good for you, especially when it comes to people who are known enemies of Islam. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I want to thank the organizers for this opportunity for me to be here tonight, and it's a beautiful setting. Wassalamu wassalatu ala Sayyidina Abil Qasim al-Mustafa Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala.